In every horror film, there is a door, and behind that door lurks that which we fear the most. That which we fear in real life, something that lurks behind the closed door in our own mind. It's often the fear of death, the fear of pain. And yet that door must be opened. We must confront our own mortality, our own feeling of inadequacy. And in the best horror films, that door is opened for us. We glimpse the horror, are able to confront it, and walk away with the feeling that from then on we can live with the fear of death or the fear of suffering. We can understand it a little better, and in so doing, understand our own souls.
This is Teresa. And this is me, Bonnie. Teresa and I have floated in and out of each other's lives for many years, and whenever we reconnect, it always feels like yesterday when we last talked. I remember when she, her sister Diane, and Mom Evelyn moved in 2 doors down from us in Cedar Place during the late 70s. This was right around the time when my dad was in the hospital waiting for a quadruple bypass. I think the very first memory I have of Teresa is of her hanging out with the cool kids. I found myself hanging out with them once when one of the bigger kids had tied a rope to a tree and we were taking turns swinging over a stream. Somehow the subject of my dad came up and she asked me, "What are you going to do if your dad dies?" To be honest, this hadn't even occurred to me. I'd already witnessed a few minor heart attacks, but my parents were considerably older, so doctors and hospitals just seemed normal. I didn't know how to answer her. This story isn't about that specifically, though. This story is about something big that happened when we were only 14 in the year 1982.
The incident. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, Mom says we were 4. Did you say 14?
I think we're 14.
Yeah, that's what Mom said too, because I was asking her about it. It wasn't summer.
No.
Because of school, right?
Yeah.
School. Because
Yeah.
we're skipping out.
We skipped out of school a lot back then. Teresa was never caught, but I always was. This particular fall morning, though, we were sitting in the kitchen eating Ichabod noodles while my mom was having her tea.
Oh, that you're like we stayed at your house. Your mom was home.
I know.
It's not like we're hiding from anyone.
While we were giving my mom some crazy-ass excuse as to why we weren't in school, we started hearing screaming out front of the townhouse complex we lived in.
And I heard screaming.
Yeah.
And I just assumed that it was this lady screaming at her kid.
There was a parent in our block who was always raging at her kid, and we assumed it was her. This was particularly bad, though, even more blood-curdling than normal.
So you know what I'm like, right?
Yeah.
Getting up, stomping over, getting ready to finally tell her to shut up.
My mom also suggested we give the kid a cookie to settle him down.
So I got up and I swung the door open and then getting ready to yell, and then I look over and just across the parking lot, sort of kitty-corny from your door.
She then staggered back a step, turned slightly towards me, staring with her mouth open.
You know the term scared to death?
She was completely white and shaking.
I just couldn't move.
Yeah.
And I couldn't call. Tried to call you, but it was just whisper. Like I wanted to scream, Bonnie!
While Teresa's back was against the door, I leaned out and also froze to the spot.
I've never been as so scared in my life ever since.
It felt like a long time before I managed to yell for my mom. How my mom knew exactly what to do is still a bit of a mystery.
Your mom, I think, ran past both of us, and she had pots and pans.
Yeah.
And she ran down the stairs, and I remember being worried for her.
She ran out the front door, down the 4 steps, smashing pots and pans together while screaming at the man to stop. He then ran off down the alley, still clutching a large chef's knife.
I know that she scared him away.
Yeah.
He stopped, and
What my mom interrupted,
it was a man stabbing a lady in her doorway.
what Teresa and I first saw, was the woman before she collapsed with her outstretched hand towards us.
Like, it was what I remember is quite a long knife.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember the knife going in and out, just in and out, in and out, in and out.
Teresa and my mom ran over to the woman, and I ran inside to call 911.
And then we all went over
Yeah.
to help her.
By the time I joined them, my mom was leaning over the woman and performing CPR.
And every time she pushed down on her chest, the blood would gush out her back.
Yeah.
Because we all didn't realize that she had been stabbed, you know,
Yeah.
front and back kind of thing.
The home was completely covered in blood.
There was fighting involved, like, way before they got to the door. I think the TV was tipped over.
Then I noticed the woman's son. He was in shock with a large cut in his hand.
When he tried
to grab the knife.
Yeah,
Is that how it happened? Yeah.
I wrapped his hand up and took more towels downstairs to where the woman lay and placed one under her head,
At some point you were holding her head.
while my mom continued pushing on her chest and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her glassy blank eyes stared back at me. I wasn't aware then that she had already passed away. Eventually, the police arrived. There were 2 of them. They casually walked in at the far end of the block. Teresa and I yelled at them to hurry, but they took their time. They left my mom working on the woman while they called for an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, my mom finally tried to step aside in order to let them take over. When she stood, though, she collapsed in a faint. She had been in the hospital just the week before and was still quite weak. Though I thought I was keeping pretty calm through it all, this final moment broke me and I burst into hysterics, seeing my mom lying next to the woman. Thankfully, she came around quickly and I calmed down.
We were so annoyed that it was still, you know, the scene was left so long.
Yeah.
She was there for a while, wasn't
Teresa and I sat on my front steps, looking over at the doorway where the woman's fuzzy slippered feet were still sticking out, and watching the coroner and police do what they needed to.
it? Like, I looked over there and I just thought that the Wicked Witch of the West, when the
Yes!
house, didn't we think of it?
Yes, that's what made us laugh.
Somehow we found humor in it. We weren't laughing that someone had been murdered. We were laughing because the circumstances were so absurd.
This is so typical of them. See something like that.
We were strange kids normally, and this was our odd way of dealing with the shock, I suppose.
We would have thought we were okay, and I guess we were. I mean, I don't know.
We totally were okay.
Things just went on as they normally did, which I suppose included me quitting school within a year or so. 36 years later, a lifetime really, Teresa and I are once again talking about it.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi!
Teresa and I both feel now that we probably would have skipped out of counseling too, even if it had been offered.
Never gone to counseling anyways, honestly.
No,
Would
we wouldn't have.
I asked Teresa if she thinks this incident had formed her at all, but she was uncertain.
I tell people the story now because it's come up and they go, makes sense now. A lot makes sense.
I know that's what people say to me too.
You didn't get counseling. Okay, things are coming together for me.
Later, she did write me back, though, to say, I think I have to amend my thoughts on how fiercely protective I was with you. We had to have been traumatized by what we saw that day, only no one addressed it. Whether it's changed me at all, I don't know. I've only ever had one dream about it a few years after it happened. I dreamed I was playing hide-and-go-seek with the woman's son. He was hiding, I was seeking. I walked up his front steps and flipped open the mailbox in the front door. And his mother's glassy blank eyes were staring back at me.